Mark S. in the Netherlands and me in Colorado. And I just was out mowing for the last hour and a half, and I got a bunch of grass in my throat, so it's kind of scratchy. So I'm going to stop. Mark wants to tell you about where he's at and what he's doing, why he's there, and then go on with his talk. And he is so excited to talk about nutrient cycling. And would you guys, any of you that are relatively new, put in the chat where you're from and throw some ones in there if you're hearing us okay. Mark's signal is really good. I'm at least hearing him great. So,
right.
And I'm coughing, and I'm going to mute myself. And Mark, go ahead, man.
All righty. And my, just to let you know, Wayne, I'd already told Mark, I'm not able to type answers to questions, so you guys will have to read questions back to me. So yeah, I'm here in the Netherlands. Okay. Many of you guys already know that my book was translated into Dutch. It was the first foreign language it was translated into. What is fascinating about Holland is the fact that of all the countries in the world, the USA is the largest exporter of agricultural products. The Netherlands, about the size of your pinky fingernail, is the #2 exporter of agricultural products on the planet. So Dutch farmers are, in my argument, the best of the best when it comes to actually producing tons of agricultural products for sale. Are they doing it well and correctly? Well, you know, that's a different debate. It's very heavily chemicalized, massive internal confinement operations for livestock, huge manure problem, disposal problem because of all the livestock, etc. Of course, they're experts at undercover in controlled environments. They're starting to get more into aquaculture with the fish and all that. So they brought me here for a conference. They have a lot of regulations concerning what percentage when they drain a new area, a polder is what it's called. There's a certain percentage of it that the farmers are the first ones that come in and manage the land. They have to put it into nature. Well, where we were today was at a nature preserve that they're experimenting with these ideas of, agroforestry systems, permaculture systems. They're overly stuck on the food forest concept, the little tiny chaotic food forest that doesn't really produce enough to pay anybody an income or feed anybody. And then, of course, there's my whole translation of the book, and there's a whole, tonight we had almost 500 people in a triple-decker auditorium all asking intense questions, and it was interviewed ferociously. And so it's 12:30 past midnight here, and I'm exhausted. And part of what I talked about during all of my talks is what I'm going to present tonight. And I am really excited about this because I think it's truly miraculous. If you look at the natural world, think about it. The natural world takes care of itself without any inputs whatsoever. There are inputs, but they're disturbances or natural parts of the ecosystem. There's no cash inputs to a system, and we'll talk a lot about how do natural systems, natural plant communities survive and reproduce, etc. And I'm just going to review. I have a phenomenal foot cramp right now, so I'm dealing with that. I'm going to review some of the I've talked about in the past few weeks. Regeneration is a biological and ecological term that includes the reproduction of plants and animals as well. It's the process that ensures the reproduction of successive generations of individuals, populations of individuals, communities of different species within a given landscape ecosystem. And if a plant and animal community cannot reproduce itself and persist in this environment, by definition, ecological definition, it's not regenerative. I don't care what the marketing department says about different methods of agriculture. The definition that came first about regeneration within plant communities is this. It has to be able to reproduce itself and persist in the environment the way things are, all by itself. And we've seen this for a few weeks now. This is a mountaintop in Italy. There were humans living there for literally over 1,000 years. The agriculture is based on stone pine for the pine nuts, linden, which basswood for honey and for light wood crafts and making lighter products, baskets and boxes and so on. Chestnut, walnut, hazelnut, apples, pears, plums, cherries. They even grow, and of course there's grapes, raspberries, blackberries, and then on the terraces that they made, they would grow their annual crops, which include grains. They graze their animals, and they graze their animals in the high country. It was cleaned out by Mussolini in World War II, and it's been, first of all, regenerative for thousands of years with people interacting with it, and then for the past almost 80 years, all by itself, it's reproducing itself, and it's propagating itself, and it's closing in all of the annual land that used to be used for growing crops. This is regenerative agriculture because it persists and reproduces in its natural environment all by itself. This is the #4 Google hit, at least it was last week, for regenerative farm images. Does that meet the ecological definition of regenerative? Let's throw a natural disturbance at it and see if it persists. Will it reproduce the individual plants, the groups of plants, the species of plants, the plant community types? Will it persist, reproduce, and expand and grow and move in its place? I think not. That natural disturbance destroyed the regenerative farm. The #4 regenerative farm hit on the internet. Maybe they can get disaster payments to regenerate. I don't know. So if a plant community, an animal community cannot reproduce itself and persist and expand and grow and move and change, then it is not regenerative, period. Now let's talk about nutrient cycling in woody plant systems. Carbohydrates are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in plants comes from the atmosphere. So plants are basically a gigantic pile of atmosphere sitting on the soil. A redwood tree is a huge pile of air. It's material taken right out of the air using sunlight and water and a very, very small amount of mineral nutrients from the soil. This is where some people have a hard time with listening to what I talk about, because I tend to agree with some of the hydroponic people that are just growing plants in a sterile medium and then they add nutrients to it. But that's actually the soil isn't what it's all about, despite what organic agriculture says in the composters, etc. The actual nutrients within the system, they're very minor, they're small, they're not the majority of a plant. The majority of a plant is a carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The other nutrients are extremely important. They're very critical. They enter the terrestrial system from the atmosphere through what's called wet and dry precipitation. We'll talk about that later. Through the weathering of the soil minerals itself, which is the bedrock or the gravel or sand, whatever the parent material is, or from importation from offsite that comes in from outside, either in the form of deposition through floodwaters depositing silt and nutrients that way, or for animals coming through, migrating through a system. And we'll see diagrams like this that are very similar to one another, that talk about different nutrients, and I'm not going to go through and explain every picture. You guys can look at them and go through them afterwards. I just want to hit the basic points because this is such a complex topic. We don't have hardly any time to cover everything. And so the plants do assimilate these nutrients from the soil. They turn them into they incorporate themselves into their body. They mix them with the carbon that they get from the atmosphere to form living biomass. All the tissues of a plant, which we'll talk about. I know I have them listed later on, but cellulose and lignin and hemicellulose and so on are all different parts of a woody plant. Eventually, they will return those nutrients back to the soil when they shed leaves, when roots slough off, when branches fall to the ground. Also, the roots will exude liquids, sugars into the soil. All of the stuff that comes off of a woody plant, whether it's a shrub or a tree or a cane or a vine, they're called plant litter. Plant litter is one of the absolute critical keys to fertility and health and vigor of trees. And the fact that trees cycle and recycle and cycle and recycle the same nutrients over and over again means that if you are actually, if minerals are coming to the site in the form of these minerals released into the soil from the parent material, and if they're coming in through wet and dry deposition, what's happening is woody plant systems actually can accumulate these critical plant nutrients on a site, and because they recycle them over and over and over again, you can actually have an increasing level of fertility through time, as long as you don't disrupt that too much or export too many nutrients from the site. After the dead plant material hits the forest floor, this is the whole soil food web gang. The microbial mediated process kicks in, and all of the minerals that were in the leaf, all the nutrients that were in the leaf or the branch or whatever, now become part of the decomposer organism, whether it's a fungi or a bacteria, springtails, nematodes, mice, all sorts of decomposer organisms that then recycle it into their bodies, and they in turn decompose once again. And eventually those minerals are released back into the soil, into the moisture within the soil, where the trees can then reabsorb them, or other plants, grasses and so on, can reabsorb them and use them in their bodies. And the uptake of nutrients into the plant, and the fact that it's shedding material and it's exuding sugars into the soil, causes these nutrients to cycle over and over and over again. They're called biogeochemical processes because there's biology involved, not just the tree or the shrub, it's also all the soil organisms involved. And it's geo because it also includes the weathering of the bedrock, the parent material, gravel, whatever. The parent material is what it's called in most soil scientists, is what the basic mineral skeleton from which your soil comes from. And then it's the release of those minerals from the parent material that's critical for perennial system health. It's the cycling of those nutrients within the system, and the fact that these deep-rooted trees that keep recycling nutrients over and over again, they can retain these nutrients and use them repeatedly over and over and over. That's how it controls the nutrient supply to the plant and helps to control the growth and vigor of the plants. And I'm not going to talk too much about the uptake of water and nutrients. Obviously it goes into the roots, it moves through all the vascular tissues inside the plant, and so there's material coming into the roots, going up through the tree, turning into leaves, falling as litter, leaf litter, branches, twigs, bark being shed, roots are sloughing over and over again, and other processes that we'll talk about pretty soon here. Now the net primary productivity, the NPP, it's the total amount of it's the total amount of photosynthate left over after a plant uses what it needs for its own metabolism. So a tree grows, for example, and it requires a certain amount of energy to actually grow. Well, then it has extra, and it stores it as fat. And we saw a couple weeks ago, anyways, about the different woody structures. And in ring porous woody plants, the more summer wood, the late wood that they put on, that means that the plant had a much happier year. It was putting on a lot more fat, had a lot more net primary productivity available to it. It's this net primary productivity, it's this extra photosynthate that's available that now becomes additional energy stored in the system that we can utilize as humans for fuel. It can be used as fuel for the soil food web, the whole nutrient cycling that's going on. It can also be used for the production of foods that we then take into our bodies and either export from the site for sale or recycle using animals. And we're going to discuss some of the processes that are involved with the movement of these different nutrients within the system. All of these systems, from the Arctic to the desert to humid to arid, moist, temperate, all have certain amounts of surplus photosynthate available to those plants that's available to drive the system energetically. It's just different. You may be limited by extreme cold. You may be limited, plant growth might be limited by shortage of daylight hours during a season that's warm enough for photosynthesis to take place. It might be nutrient limited. It could actually be animal limited by severe grazing or browsing from elephants and so on. Or it may have abundance of moisture, and in the case of many humid regions, excess moisture. Where I am in the Netherlands right now, shortage of moisture really isn't their big problem. It's excess moisture, and you can actually lose a lot of mineral nutrients in a system like that because they can leach away, they wash away. And so all of these have the similar processes. It's just different. So all of us in this audience have slightly different technical details. There's no one true answer for everybody. It's all site-specific. So the net primary productivity is the difference between the rate at which the plants produce chemical energy through photosynthesis and the rate at which they use it during respiration and growth. That's the extra. That's the surplus. That's a genuine. Return on investment. You plant a tree in the ground and it actually will grow. It will gain in value, in use value, depending on what you use that surplus for. Of course, nutrient absorption is critical to this whole thing. Healthy roots, we want to emphasize good healthy root growth, and yeah, we'll talk a little bit about healthy roots and how they actually get into how the roots actually interact with the mineral soil, with the organic matter in the soil. Spoke a little bit about that last week. We'll touch a little bit about it right now. The two of the most significant functions that they hold that plant in place, and then they absorb water and nutrients. And the anchoring of the tree is accomplished by all of the roots, small, fine roots, as well as the coarse roots. These biggest ones right here are the most significant anchors holding that woody plant in place. They may be various different shapes based on the genetics of the plant, whether they tend to grow more taprooted or fan-shaped or flat T-shaped. But it's the substrate, it's the material that they're working on that will determine the structure of that roots. And let's take the Netherlands here. In some places where I've been today, it's a rather sandy soil. It's silt that was deposited on the bottom of a river delta. They put on dikes, they pumped out all the water, but it's below sea level. So they pump the water down to -1 meter. So it's 3 feet below the ground level is where the water is. You can have the biggest taprooted tree on the planet, and it will not go underwater, except for a few. And what the heck was it? It was slash pine, I believe it is, in the southeastern U.S. Actually will put its roots underwater and feed its roots extra oxygen in order to survive. Certain plants like cypress will have the knees that start to give it a little bit more air. The root system is shaped and it's conditioned by the substrate that it's growing on. These fine woody hairs, these little hairs right here, this is where most of the nutrient uptake is occurring, the absorption. But it's not even these fine hairs, but it's the tiny, tiny, tiny root hairs, which are sometimes 1 cell thick in diameter, and they're very temporary. They'll go out into an area of decaying organic matter with mineral soil mixed through it. They'll extract whatever nutrients they can get, and when there's a nutrient shortage or whatever, they'll slough off or they can get damaged. They're very fleeting and temporary. They flux quite a bit. This is where the action is, right here. This is all about feeding our perennial woody plants. We have litter on the surface. It's decomposing. The action of the soil food web, the decomposer organisms, fungi, and so on up the food chain, the soil food chain, and the mineral soil. This boundary between the organic matter layer and the mineral soil is where most of the nutrient release, the fertilizer release for woody plants is taking place. So this is important. What is happening here? This is just a little stream that eroded, and we see a cross-section of these large woody plant roots here going through this system, and we see the whole process taking place. The surface deposition, the decomposition here. There's different organisms down deeper where there's limits of oxygen perhaps, and there's obviously limits of organic matter. There's not as much organic matter down here as there is on the surface. There's not as many mineral particles up on the surface as there is down below. This is how woody plant systems feed themselves. Now, this is one of the things where I start to get really mind blown because, you know, the language on this particular slide, I've taken it right out of textbooks. That nutrient additions to forested ecosystems are considered to be relatively small compared to the annual requirements of actively growing overstory trees. Well, excuse me, Mr. Professor, who did the university research on this. If the nutrient additions to forested ecosystems are small compared to the annual requirements, then how the hell are trees and shrubs and bushes and vines alive if it's small compared to their requirements? I think that this right here, somebody set up a test that proved this particular sentence, but reality shows us otherwise. You go to, I saw that Phil Beard was on here. Let's go just a few miles north of Phil Beard into some, you know, wild, you know, subboreal forest or whatever it is. Nobody's doing anything to it, and yet all of those plants somehow are alive. So they are getting their annual requirements met. Well, what may not be happening is the trees may not be producing as much net primary productivity as they possibly could. And so that means by adding extra nutrients to it or supplementing with water, we can actually get more yield, more wood, more fruit, more nuts, more berries, et cetera, et cetera. Forested ecosystems, nutrient additions in forested ecosystems are totally adequate for the annual requirements of the plants that actually survive there, because if they weren't adequate, the plants would die. So what they say is between 5 and 20% of the annual need is met by these natural processes. You go to a natural area where there is no human intervention, 100% of those plant needs are met by the system. So I argue, and reality proves that this is more like 100%. 100% of those plants' annual needs can be supplied and maintained through these natural processes, and by understanding how these processes work, from rock weathering, biological fixation, litter decay, crown wash, litter fall, dry deposition, wet deposition. We'll talk all about these briefly. 100% of the plant nutrients, 100% of the fertilizer comes from the environment free of charge, period. Look at this right here. You're trying to tell me this tree isn't alive? This tree isn't getting its nutrients, its nutrient requirements met? Yes, I'm sure that if it was living in a beautiful, soft, crumbly, perfectly mineral balanced and all the excess nutrients that it needs to grow, that tree would probably produce more olives or whatever kind of tree it is, pistachios right now. It's perfectly adequately nourished, it's alive, it's thriving, with sheer total utter neglect, $0 cost to get that tree to grow. This is, to me, a miracle. And this is how we can, you know, double the world's food supply in 50 years. No farmer would consider this to be a farm. I do, and hopefully you guys are starting to consider that this right here is a farm. These plant communities create the soil in place by their activities, by them being there. Now, the mineral weathering is part of the process. The actual rocks themselves, the gravel, the mineral particles of the substrate, through abrasion, oxidation, they get dissolved by chemicals. These nutrients are slowly released from an inorganic, static mineral form. They get dissolved or chelated and get taken up into plant and animal bodies. Lichens and fungi are some of the first, the front line of this process. Once those minerals are now in the bodies of living organisms, they can get recycled over and over and over and over again. The rate of weathering is different based on the substrate, and it's influenced by temperature, the availability of water, the acidity, the pH, or the acidity or alkalinity, and the biological activity. Each one of these items in bold is a control point. We can manage our system, and to a certain extent, we can help to keep temperatures in an optimal zone. We can optimize the water. We can play with the soil chemistry and the biological activity. All of these fairly simply using 100% natural techniques. These are some of our control knobs on the system. This is just showing some examples here of raindrops fall on it. As rain falls through the atmosphere, there's carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. As the rain falls down, many of us have heard the term acid rain. Well, most rain is slightly acidic. It picks up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and it makes a mild carbonic acid, which dissolves the rock. It dissolves the bare bedrock, just raindrops falling on it, not even counting the physical abrasion and erosion of moving water and other particles. Then, of course, there are plants that start to put roots down. There's fungi that get involved. And over time, the rock breaks apart, weathers into smaller and smaller particles, more surface area exposed, and more of that mineral dissolved and taken into fungal and lichen and plant tissues. This just shows, I'm going to show this slide later on again too, just different rates of weathering. This mineral weathering, that they measure how much mineral is actually dissolved just in the rain. Different climates, different soil types, different parent materials, etc. These, not counting nitrogen, I'll show that later, these are some of the most commonly leached nutrients that when there's an excess water moving through the soil column, they're more likely to wash away than some of the others. How do plants influence the weathering? They're secreting all kinds of acids and goo. They're also secreting sugars that are feeding fungi and other soil life that are then secreting their own acids and goo. Of course, their respiration of actually functioning and living, and that's part of the process of secreting stuff. All the decomposing litter, the leaves, the twigs, bark, and so on. Evapotranspiration, they're pulling water through the soil strata and emitting it into the atmosphere. Over here we see where the water mixing with carbon dioxide, forming a mild carbonic acid that starts to dissolve this. And of course, trees, the roots anchor and stabilize the soil. So the plants actually are part of the process of the weathering of the mineral substrate, the creating of soil right here. And of course, not all geological materials are the same. Some weather rapidly. The softer sedimentary rocks will weather more rapidly. Others more slowly. The harder, let's take diamonds for example. They take a long time to weather. They also have various different mineral compositions. This is basalt, which is an igneous, a volcanic formed rock. This is a limestone. This is a sedimentary form. This is all the shells of all kinds of aquatic organisms. And this is a schist, which is a metamorphic, and I don't know what the parent material was. Then it's kind of heated and cooked by geological processes. Each one of these types of stone has certain elements in it that are represented. The limestone is mostly calcium carbonate. The basalt is a very broad range. A whole host of mineral nutrients can be in there, and the schist can be, who knows, all kinds of different minerals that will be in there. If these are your parent material, the bedrock and the crumbled rock or the deposited silt in your area, this limestone will always have something missing. There's some basic mineral element missing in there, and this is where, if we're doing a cation exchange capacity soil test, that we'll find out there are certain minerals that are quote-unquote out of balance. Well, they're out of balance for the optimal growth of many of our crop plants. They are what they are, and there are plant communities that will live there. But if we want to fundamentally change the soil chemistry of calcium-derived soils, that's a long road to hoe, and it'll take you forever. But we can tweak it. With the basalt, it's a very broad spectrum. There's very few mineral shortages in there, so you'll have typically a lot more healthier plants. However, the calcium is critical for a lot of transport of nutrients into the roots. I won't bother to get into that. So when when I add quote-unquote fertility amendments to systems on my farm, I'm adding crushed rocks that provide the basic mineral components that are in shortage supply. New Forest Farm, Southwest Wisconsin, is a limestone bedrock, but the limestone is dolomite limestone, and it has high levels of magnesium. It's a calcium magnesium carbonate, and so through time, as cropping has occurred, much of the calcium is removed in the crop that leaves, and the magnesium stays behind. So the ratio of calcium to magnesium changes so that it now becomes a limit on other plant growth. So whatever your minerals are, these are the things that we can tweak. It doesn't take as much mineral amendment to tweak our mineral balance. And I'm sure that we'll address cation exchange soil test at some point in time. If I don't, somebody else will. These are the most commonly leached nutrients in forested ecosystems. And so if we have a high moisture environment, some people I've worked with in Vermont, normal to have 60 or 70 inches of rain per year, there will be leaching of nutrients because you will have water that's going through the soil column and taking these nutrients away from the system. Now, with the exception of mica schist, this is a picture of it right there, very few geological materials have significant quantities of nitrogen. Nitrogen is probably the most limiting factor for the speed of plant growth. It's a basic component of proteins, and it is required for plants to grow fast. So mineral weathering isn't really a significant way of getting nitrogen into our system. So where do we get it from? Well, you know what? We get nitrogen from the air. I think it's 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. That's where we get it from. So the atmosphere, not only the air itself, providing this amount of gaseous nutrient available to plants, and we'll talk about how that gets used later. There's what's called wet deposition, which is the addition of nutrients in rain or snow. As a raindrop falls through the sky, it picks up pieces of dust, or actually more commonly, or as commonly, as raindrops are formed around a particle, a little tiny particle. It's the nucleus of a raindrop. So these little nuclei, these little dust particles in the atmosphere have now water on it. It falls down onto the soil, or it lands on the leaf canopy. It's intercepted. That's called interception. There's dry deposition, which is dust blowing through the air. And anybody who lives near gravel roads and gets a dry period of time in the middle of the growing season, you see a car drive down the road, it's a big plume of dust. Well, if that's made out of your local parent material, you're just redepositing fine dust onto your plants. And some of that dust will be taken up by the plant directly. Some of the wet deposition will be taken up by the plant directly. There's stomata, little holes in the leaves where both dry particles and wet drops of water can get into it. With the lenticels, little dashes on the stem that we've talked about before, lenticels are actually holes that go right into the tree to allow gases to exchange, but also particles go in as well. And then there's a cloud deposition, which is non-precipitating water. It's just super humid air. It's fog or humidity that's so thick that you can cut it with a knife. These are the three different primary atmospheric deposition pathways. Of course, the wet mixes with the dry on a plant surfaces, and it really can significantly affect the chemical composition of the through flow, in part because what it does, there are some nutrients that are absorbed into the leaf and the stem. Others are leached from the leaves and stems. So potassium and calcium and magnesium are leached from the stems. And this through fall, if you stand underneath the canopy of a tree, it takes about a half inch of rainfall, a centimeter of rainfall, to just get all of the leaves on a mature tree wet. That's the interception. Well, then after a half inch, then you'll start to get some through fall, which are just generally small, gentle drips. It's not the catastrophic pounding of the rain here. Well, that through fall has all kinds of nutrients that it's leached from the leaf itself. The leaf in some place has excreted materials that are waste products to the leaf at the time, And also there are dust particles, etc., bacteria, fungi on the surface of the leaves that comes through in the through fall, and that's part of the fertilizer being added to the tree. Stem flow is really fascinating in that you'll see water just running down the bark. The branches bring it in, and the channels in the bark channel it, deposit it right at the base. Epiphytes such as Spanish moss and the cycads in the tropics, they're a tremendous source of extra nutrient in the system. The Spanish moss, for example, is a lichen. Reindeer moss is more further north in subboreal areas. They're lichens, which is an algae fungus combination, and they're actually many of the lichens are actually nitrogen fixing. They take nitrogen right out of the air and they put it into a plant available form. Then as the water drips through them, it picks up some of this nitrogen fertilizer. So if you have trees like this, I've known people in the south who are spraying their trees to get rid of the epiphytes on their trees, but that's a very huge and significant source of nutrient for that tree. So we can, if you don't like it, or it's perhaps you think it's limiting yield because it's growing on branches and covering active green leaf matter, maybe you can do a little bit of trimming and moving aside, but let's not wipe that out because this is some of the fertilizer of these trees. There's some epiphytic lichens in the Pacific Northwest of the USA that have been found to be the primary source of exterior nitrogen to these old growth forested systems, and this one particular kind will not grow any closer to the ground than 100 feet. And so it takes an old growth forest to be a host to this particular epiphytic lichen that then becomes the biggest nitrogen source for that system. So epiphytes and lichens are critical for our nutrient balance in fertilizer in our trees. The stem flow, once again, this returns a concentrated liquid fertilizer right to the base of the tree. Now, I've shown this picture before, and I want you guys to also use a little bit of imagination. Imagine a monocrop of, this is pine, eastern white pine, and look at the canopy on it. There's these tall trees that may be 40, 50, 60, 100 foot tall, but there's only a shallow, tiny, thin layer of canopy. It's a very two-dimensional canopy. There's not a lot of three-dimensionality to the system, so there's not as much surface area exposed to the sun, so the trees won't grow as fast because they're not getting as much sunlight. There's not as much surface area exposed to water, so it can get covered with water and take in water. There's not as much surface area exposed to the atmosphere, so it can take in more gases. There's not as much surface area to catch this wet and dry deposition, which is more mineral nutrients coming to the site. So the canopy characteristics of our site, the spatial arrangement of it, and the total surface area, the greater the surface area on our woody polyculture system, the greater our ability to capture deposition, the natural wet and dry deposition of fertilizer from the sky. If you live anywhere near agriculture, anytime it's dry and dusty, or even not dry and dusty, a tractor drives across the field where they're putting fertilizer on their field, some nitrogen attached to a piece of dirt flying through the air, floats through the air, and it comes into your system. What we want to do is we're creating these three-dimensional, deeply structured three-dimensional systems, optimizing their photosynthesis, and these deep three-dimensional structures now have a tremendous amount of surface area. It's like we're coral on a reef, and we're just filter feeding all the fertilizer right out of the sky. And carbon dioxide, obviously, we're sequestering a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide. We can take more out when we have faster growing plants because we've optimized their surface area. This is more of a structure that we're looking like. Two of those systems are systems of mine that I've planted. This one right here is a modeling. There's been some modeling done, University of Illinois Urbana, the woody perennial polyculture research folks. How do we take a square surface acre of land and every year, with one little mathematical step, maximize the surface area through time. That's a mathematical equation that they kind of figured out. They run it a zillion times on a computer. Well, then how can we manage our agricultural land, and can we actually afford to manage our agricultural land to optimize, maximize that surface area exposed to the sun, exposed to deposition from the atmosphere, exposed to the air and the water and the rain. And if you think about fractals, this is just taking a triangle, and then we repeat the pattern, we repeat the pattern, we repeat the pattern, we repeat the pattern. That's all that trees are, is they're this fractal pattern, branching over and over and over again. Their own architecture is attempting to optimize their surface area exposed to the air, the water, the sun, etc. And so we can figure out, if you want to, I'm sure we can get some researchers to catch dust in the air, and we can calculate how much deposition we're actually getting. Now this I'm really a little bit bummed out that the colors didn't come out on this well. This is fairly good. There are 3 different colors. There's dark shading, medium shading, and then the white. And this is just showing the different atmospheric depositions of sulfur, different nitrogen compounds on various different systems. We've got spruce fir forest, beech maples, white pine, meadows, meadow with forest, prairie, Douglas fir forest. And we have corn, wheat, and soybeans. This is, if I could spend 2 hours just talking about the ramifications, the implications of this particular graph right here. If we look at our corn and soybeans, as SC. You look on SC, there basically is 0 cloud deposition on an annual crop field. It's only from the rain. There's almost 0 dry deposition. So this annual crop field is capturing very little extra fertilizer for free. Whereas if we go with CD, this is a higher altitude red spruce forest, they're catching a tremendous amount of it as dust. It's just dry deposition, clouds and fog. So just to look at this in the different systems and think about, okay, well, what's the physiography of the terrain? What's the moisture regime like? What's the weather patterns like? What's the parent material like where we are? What's the parent material upwind where all this dust, whether it's wet or dry or clouds coming through? Wherever you live in the world, you can map the various different kinds of dusts that are going to be coming through to your place, and that's genuine fertilizer. It's legit. Biological inputs of nitrogen come from free-living soil bacteria, from tree roots that are in association with bacteria. There's fungi, epiphytic lichens, the decay of woody debris. Now think of this again. Here's our control points. If we manage what kind of soil life we have, not just bacteria, but also fungi, and if we maintain our healthy systems, we have plenty of free-living bacteria in the litter, in the mineral soil, we have epiphytic lichens, and we have decaying woody debris. This is how terrestrial woody systems fertilize themselves with what they need. This is like the live action full throttle fast food is all this the decay layer. That decay cycle in our perennial farming systems is critical to the health and fertility of our program. There's free living bacteria, azotobacters and Clostridium. They just take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and they put it into plant available form, and they grow for a while. When they die, it's released to the system. So Azotobacter, Clostridium, actinomycetes, or other bacteria just free living in the soil. If we favor those, we're accumulating more nitrogen. The organic matter is the energy that keeps these guys alive. So decaying organic matter, these breaking of a double carbon bond, that's the energy that keeps these guys alive. They take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, turn it into plant available form. It's massively significant. 5 to 20% is what was said earlier according to the textbooks. 100% of the plant's nutritional needs can come from natural processes in the system. These are some of the blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. They're fairly common in more arid environments. You walk along and there'll be this crust and you say, well, gee, that looks like it was once upon a time algae, but there's no water here. And they're a type of cyanobacteria, and you'll get it in more temperate environments as well. They require high light. So do we want to have a closed canopy forest? Well, if we have a closed canopy forest, we're going to lose the benefits of having cyanobacteria in our system that's adding more fertilizer to our system. So once again, this puts us into this idea of a semi-open wood pasture is what they call it here in Europe, a savanna, a agroforestry system, and you'll start to get cyanobacteria contributing. And many lichens are composed, part of it is a cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, and so you can see these lichens all over the trees. I like lichens on my trees because when the water runs through a lichen, it's picking up fertilizer and it's running down these channels and it's watering and it's fertilizing the trees. These I've said over and over again that I would love somebody to give me a rock in the middle of Lake Superior and I'll farm it. Well, this is how I'll farm it. I'm not the one who's really doing all of the work here. It's starting with our lichens. This is one of the pictures that I talked about a couple weeks ago, that these orange lichens are basically only a certain elevation above the water. They're all stratified by elevation above the water, that these orange ones won't really thrive up here, and these green ones won't really thrive down there. So these lichens are dissolving the rock itself. Whenever it rains, there's nutrient water, hydroponic nutrient water that's feeding. This is a serviceberry, Amelanchier canadensis, Saskatoon, some people call it. There was a hazelnut coming out of the bottom. There was raspberries coming out the bottom. These were mostly blueberries up top. There were roses in there for rose hips, and then this was a spruce tree. So this is how we would farm a rock in the middle of the Lake Superior. The cyanobacteria, the lichens are critical to the nutrient supply. Of course, nitrogen-fixing rhizobia, most people are familiar with that. Alders, the Alnus family, has a different type of rhizobia than legumes. This is a black locust, and this is a black locust roots. In here, there's the bacteria is incorporated into the root tissue itself, and the bacteria is taking the gases from the plant, from the tree, and converting it into nitrates and nitrites. So somebody's going to have to do the math. I did this last night at like 1 o'clock in the morning. But if we get 1 kilogram per acre of dry deposition, 5 kilograms of wet deposition, and 85 kilograms of nitrogen fixation going on, that's 91.5 kilograms per hectare per year of nitrogen coming into the system in an unmanaged natural system. That's free fertilizer. That comes out to about 85 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. 85 pounds of nitrogen. And that doesn't even count like clovers and alfalfa that might be in your system. Red clover will fix another 85 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. So there's 170 pounds of free fertilizer. But then, oh gee, let's talk about animals and animal urine and animal manure. Just look at the fertilizer that is coming into our system if we're managing a restoration agriculture system. And so let's review this for a minute. Nutrients entering the forested ecosystem from mineral weathering, atmospheric deposition, biological fixation, enter the soil and enter into the plant. within the plant. They're moved around inside the plant. They're turned into leaves and branches, and then they fall to the ground where they decompose and they get reused again by the soil life. And every step of the way in here, we can help to manage mineral weathering on our site, mostly by managing water and aeration. So a subsoil or a yeoman's plow will help to get extra oxygen in there. We'll have oxidation going on, which will assist in the mineral weathering. Extra water will help with the mineral weathering. Adjusting our pH if that's appropriate in your particular context. Those are all adjusting and working with the natural process of getting nutrients into the plant. Now, if we play with canopy structure and shape and three-dimensionality, we can now catch more wet deposition and dry deposition, increasing the fertilizers that way. Now, if we're using combinations of nitrogen-fixing woody plants and nitrogen-fixing herbaceous plants, we have just a tremendous amount of fertilizer, free fertilizer in our soil. And this is how we get all of these minerals into our system. Well, then one of the keys to this whole thing, and you've seen some videos before this summer, is managing our decay cycle, and I'll talk about that later on as well. Of course, the nutrients have to move from the root surface to the root surface, and then into the plant. And hopefully, some of the folks on the EAT platform here will be talking about soil and plant health and how nutrients actually move into the plant. And one of the ways I've heard it described, Gary Zimmer from Midwestern Bioag, describing calcium, it's like the truck driver. Calcium is a truck driver that brings all these different nutrients to the plant. Sulfur is the key that unlocks the door to the warehouse, and then nutrients that the truck has carried in the soil, the soil colloid, can now be taken into the plant. Some nutrients are taken in by pure diffusion, and a lot of the nitrogen fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers that are used, there's so much nitrogen been put into the soil solution. There's more nitrogen in the soil just by simple diffusion. It moves into the plant material, so then it's balanced, equal outside and inside. Other nutrients are actually taken in by active transport, where the plant actually spends energy to grab nutrients and bring them in, and we don't have time to go into that in this particular webinar. Now, plant litter production above and slightly below the soil surface directly controls the amount of and timing of nutrients returned to the forest floor. Plant litter production and its decomposition directly controls the amount and timing of nutrients returned and released within the forest soil, forest floor, and the mineral soil. This is I think, one of the critical strategic tidbits of information that's really, really helpful in our restoration agriculture systems. By managing our decay cycle of our plant litter, we can time when we pulse nutrients into our system, just like applying a liquid fertilizer, except we're just using the surplus, the net primary productivity, as the fuel and the recycling the mineral nutrients to the soil. Then the life of all the activities, cyanobacteria and algae and lichens, nitrogen-fixing plants, and so on, are now adding all these additional plant materials to it, and the driver of the system is the energy found in our organic matter, which is our plant litter. I just said this, didn't I guess. By managing the timing of litter deposition, that means chop and drop. I was just contacted today by one of the people who works with Ernst Goetsch, or Goetsch, or how do you pronounce his last name. I just discovered him a few years ago. He's been working in South America, Brazil, I guess. And of anybody, how he's managed his system is doing it as similar to me as I've met anybody doing anywhere. I haven't met him yet. He's coming to the Netherlands on Wednesday, and I happen to be leaving on Tuesday, which kind of sucks. I won't get to meet him. But he's the first person, in one of his videos online, I forgot what the name of the video is, he says that once you get to the point where you're doing chop and drop, and you're cutting branches and putting them on the ground and chopping them up to decompose, once you get into the chop and drop phase, everything just accelerates. He's the first person I've ever heard say that, and that's exactly what I've experienced. Once you start getting into the place where we're going to cut it and chip it or rot it right on the spot. You amp up that soil food web, and the fertilizer release is phenomenal compared to what it is before you get there. And when we time it, if you've got a tree that you want to grow for timber, you want to grow real fast, if in Wisconsin, for example, the northern temperate zone, from like May until end of June is when the trees are really elongating. Early May or late April, if we do a chop and drop, that starts to decay. There's a big, huge nutrient release right in time for that tree to take it up and grow extra fast. Well, if we have something like chestnuts, for example, and we want to set more chestnuts or have larger chestnuts, we'll go ahead and do a chop and drop as soon as the nuts are set, and now they need to size up. They need a lot of extra nutrition to speed up their photosynthesis. So if we do a chop and drop just as those nuts are set before they're ripening, we can time when we do our chop and drop to release the fertilizer in our system. You can do the same with adding mulches if you want to, but we can grow it all right on the spot. Manage your decay cycle. And this is the example right here. Chop and drop. And what was really neat about this is black locust. This is a nitrogen fixing plant. So when this black locust tree got chopped down, this root system that was feeding the tree that was there no longer is being fed by the top. So it starts to die back, and the nitrogen that it had in it is now released to the system. So what do we want to do? We want to time this. This is just prior to when we'll have an explosion of growth. Let's get our crop there that we want to be our next crop, whether it's grass or have it, in our system for next to our woody plant system. And to understand the decomposition, release of nutrients, we don't have to fully understand it. I'll let you guys read this later when you do the replay. I won't bother to do blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff is involved. It's way too complex for us to completely understand, but we can work with it. It's a useful tool. I do want to address leaching, especially because I'm in the Netherlands. When we have more precipitation coming to a system, and it goes through the soil profile, it does take soluble nutrients with it. This is how we lose nutrients in our system. Leaching is a way to have extreme amounts of nutrient loss in some cases, and we need to understand how leaching occurs, when it occurs, and this is also another reason why we want to have extremely deeply rooted trees in our system, because we want to have their roots down deep so they can capture any nutrients that have gone down below our little shallow little rooted plants. I saw a video clip of Wes Jackson once. He was standing on a balcony and he rolled down a picture diagram of like some various garden vegetable root systems. And you got a lettuce, 18 or 20 inches, and you got a wheat that's, a couple, 3 feet, corn like 6 or 7 feet, and then he rolls out a big blue stem, and it rolls down like 20 feet down the balcony. Everybody's like, ooh, yes, 20 feet deep. I'm sorry, Wes, we've got mesquites growing in Arizona that have roots going 400 feet deep. That's deep-rooted. There's no plants on the planet that have as deep and as extensive root systems as the woody plants. I'm not saying either or, I'm saying both and. Let's have our deep-rooted perennial grasses in the system and our extremely deep-rooted woody plants in the system. We will benefit from having both. Now, back to what I was mentioning about nutrient loss, leaching. When we do a harvest of biomass, if we're going to do a logging operation or a severe thinning in our system, as we go through that stem exclusion phase and we actually do the removal, or there's a big blowdown in nature, all these trees knocked down for however many dozens of square miles, at that time all of a sudden there's no more photosynthesis occurring 100 feet up in the air, so there's less gross primary productivity going on, photosynthetic productivity, so there's less sugars being put into the system. The solar radiation increases, so the soil surface warms up, and when things warm up, chemical reactions happen faster, so we can leach minerals or oxidized minerals more quickly. The organic matter decomposes faster. and it decreases the transpiration, so the soil moisture increases, which also increases the organic matter decomposition. So after a harvest, a timber harvest, or a large thinning in our systems, or a disturbance, elephants go through, knock down a whole bunch of trees, there will be a flush of nutrient that will be leached away from that system unless we know that we're going to make an intervention. We're going to do a harvest right here. I'm going to go back, see if I find it real quick. Right here. I knew that I was going to do this. So at that point in time, prior to me doing this particular severe harvest, I want to get my seed on the ground for rapid regrowth of deep-rooted perennial grasses, in my case, in this particular situation right here. I'm about to do a pretty severe cut in an area on the farm as soon as I get back there, and I'll go in ahead of time. I'll broadcast the seed all over the place, my pasture seed mix, and then I'm going to go do a severe cut. When you knock trees down, you disturb the soil, the seed gets pounded in. I'm going to leave the sticks on the surface and then go through it, drive over with the flail chopper, chip it all up. So I'll have disturbed soil, I'll have seed to soil contact, and I'll have a thin little mulch layer on top. The decomposition rate goes through the roof. These newly established grasses now have a more open canopy. They grow like crazy, their roots go down deep, and we lose less nutrient in that particular situation. You can also time things, so that's when you go in, you plant a produce crop, you plant potatoes. That would be a great time for putting potatoes in, is immediately after a clear cut, because they'll be able to utilize that excess nutrient that's leaching from the system. So these are just some examples of what happens after a severe harvest. You will have nutrients leaving the site. So the whole point is this. Within your regionally appropriate circumstances, perennial terrestrial ecosystems, woody plant systems, ag grade, they don't degrade, it's the opposite of degrade is ag grade. They grade available site nutrients, and they create the soil. They actually will accumulate nutrients to the site. And aside from some limiting deficiencies, like in my site, I've got this calcium magnesium deal going on because I'm on a dolomite bedrock. Most everybody will have certain little limiting deficiencies. If you have an old stave barrel and one stave is down here and you fill it with water, you can never get that barrel to fill any higher than the biggest deficiency. So some mineral adjustment may be useful at some point in time. You can't tell what adjustment it should be until you have an adequate soil test. So our job is to capture the free fertilizer, utilize it when we need it, and store it on the site. And it won't leach away. We don't have to leach it away. We don't have to export more nutrients from the site, and we're actually native bioavailable on that site. So we don't want to over-harvest, because you go into a abusive clear-cut situation, and then we immediately go in after that and we grow our potatoes, which, you know, over time will deplete more nutrients. They're going to capture what's there and utilize them, but then we ship them off the site again, and now we have a depleted system. So we can utilize this natural proclivity of terrestrial perennial systems to aggregate site nutrients and work within that. And since water is the most significant limiting factor on any kind of plant growth, we optimize our site hydrology, find some sort of balance between the water captured, infiltrated, and discharged. We don't want to have so much soaking through that we're leaching our nutrients away and totally impoverishing our soil. It's all a balance game, but when we work with nature and natural processes with the simplest of tools, animal impact, fire, rest, and technology, we can participate in the optimization of life on any site on this planet where there is any kind of plant life whatsoever. Now, does anything that we've been talking about in the last 40 weeks have any kind of implications for the challenge of food production, for, you know, having to double the world's food supply in the next, 50 years in order to break even? Does it have anything to do with, the fact that there are so many more people coming on this planet right now, when we can show that we can grow crops on solid rock, especially if we're in situations with declining per capita incomes? Don't even get me started on the per capita incomes, at least especially in the USA. Atmospheric CO2, we can measure increased levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Weather is strangifying. It really is. Fossil fuel, although it won't be going away anytime soon, it isn't always readily available and isn't always readily available at an affordable price. Fertilizer. They say phosphorus, we only have another 20 years before we've run out of all phosphorus, easily mineable phosphorus on the planet. Endangered species and habitats. How about health and nutrition and living a good life? Does any of this make any sense to anybody? And if it doesn't, I'm going to have to start all over again and do another 40 weeks in a row and and really get worked up. So that's all I have for the evening. Next week we'll go into carbon cycling. Then the week after that we'll talk a little bit about the different forest types, forest communities around the world, and then we'll do a review of some of your assignments. And actually, I might as well say it right here. I don't know, Wayne, if I'm going to have any prep time between now and next Wednesday. So maybe Wednesday will end up being a Q&A session with some videos. But I'll do what I can to get the prep work done. Thank you, everybody. Questions?
Well, thank you, man. As always, awesome, and it's late. Guys, yeah, we have some awesome questions here, and you guys throw some others in if you've got them. But let me start with one that Sam had. Have you heard of a farm nutrient management software? And do you think that it has a place in the restoration ag farm? We are exporting nutrients as minerals every time we send a pig, berry, or mushroom to be consumed off farm and never return. Not something I'd ever thought of and as being applicable until tonight.
Sure, and we the only nutrient management software that I'm aware of is either manure management software or chemistry fertilizer software that does that, and I don't have off the top of my head what that is. It would be nice to have somebody study those actual nutrient exports from the farm properties. But what's interesting about that is the talk about nutrient export from a site assumes that your topsoil is only like 6 or 8 inches thick. That's what some of the assumptions on arable land. Maybe Phil has some of the more accurate data on that, but topsoil is only considered so thick. And when you export these, actual with a pig or a cow, you're removing those minerals from the site. However, when you understand that soil actually isn't just the topsoil, it's the whole entire planet. The process of weathering of the planet is where we're participating in this. Life itself is slowly dissolving and consuming the solid rock of the earth. So we have virtually an unlimited supply of planet underneath us. How far can you go until you've dissolved all your bedrock? We can export minerals from this particular location almost in perpetuity because we have more bedrock underneath us. And what we're doing is we're playing the balance game between weathering that bedrock, the organic matter that's decaying, that we're adding that from our system by growing it on the spot, and that system is just slowly kind of eating its way through the bedrock to the center of the earth. I think we have plenty of minerals available to us.
Super. John, who's actually coming to your workshop in New York in about a month, asks an interesting question. He says, I'm pretty excited about coming to a workshop where it's on a relatively small property. How small do you think you can scale the kinds of things that you teach for forest ecology on a property size?
All right, so let's look at this. See where the cursor is on the screen right there? That is a 15-foot diameter circle with the Midwest oak savanna complement of species, that plant community. That's 15-foot diameter circle. That's rather small. It works. Those plants will be happy living together. The tall ones grow tall, the short ones grow short, the vines crawl on the vines, canes do what the canes, the grass grows all around. The issues with size and scale come in with pest and disease populations. The smaller the system, if you plant and that tree in the center of it is a white oak, for example. So we got white oak there, one white oak. If you have one white oak, you have enough white oak to bring in white oak pests and white oak diseases. But you may not have enough white oak to support a large enough population of pests and diseases to provide food for the predators and the control organisms that will control the population of pests and diseases. Oh my goodness, Wayne! I don't remember the guy's name. I think it's Marcel was his first name. He's one of the researchers here at the university, and he's been tracking and verifying with growers, especially greenhouse growers, the relationship between plants, numbers of plants, pest mites, the disease that the pest mites carry, and the predators that eat the pest mites, and how the plants are actually off-gassing different chemicals to signal one another, not to signal one another, but to signal the predator mites to come and eat the pest mites. And so just by doing hardcore anal PhD research with mites and cucumbers, he's all of a sudden discovered, it's like, oh my goodness, there's like a web of zillions and zillions and zillions of relationships going on here. When we're talking about ecological systems, scale does matter, because we need a certain number of plants to actually provide enough food for the pests, and so we can have enough pests to supply food for the predators. Because if you don't have enough pests, predators won't come in to eat your pests, and your pests will eat all of your plant. So scale, we can do it on a super small scale, but then you may have to be doing more interventions and not letting it go as wild as like I do. I do this is fairly wild and woolly. I haven't sprayed a pest control spray or disease control spray in the 22 years that I've been there. You probably couldn't get away with that on a 15-foot diameter circle, simply because of the whole predator-prey relationships with pests and diseases.
One little just pitch for something that's coming up. We are really excited. We've got a guy named Shubhendru Sharma, who I've told Mark a little bit about, who is who works on tiny properties and does food foresting. And Shubhendru has agreed to come and do a special presentation for us. We were going to do it next Tuesday, but that doesn't work. We wanted to market it a little bit more. I mean, this guy has literally done several, not just TEDx, but TED Talks that millions of people have watched. And he's really big in India, which is his home. Not as well known here in the U.S., but anyway, bottom line is that look for it, because sometime in about the next 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have him on. So,
and what's really fascinating about Shubhendru is similar with me, is neither of us were farmers. He's an engineer. We're
right.
not thinking about this as a farmer would think about it, or the way the universities train farmers to think about it. I'm thinking about things as an ecologist, and he's thinking about things engineering-wise, and the two systems fit both together really, really well.
Yeah, they really do. Sam has another great one. I'm going to get to that one in a minute, but here's a good one from Robert. Mark, do you chop and drop the chestnut's leaves and branches also as the nuts mature, or are you just chopping the accompanying species of trees?
It's both and here's a little bit of an embarrassing, revelation of my own personal life. As I'm walking through the chestnut trees, if I get poked in the face with branches, it's time to start trimming the chestnut trees, so I'm not getting poked in the face with branches. So that's when they're small. Well, then later on, as I'm driving through the tractor, I want to make sure that my roll cage goes underneath, and so I'll prune branches in. It's the timing of when I do that. I'll do that, prior to nut set, chop and drop. So it'll be chestnuts, and it'll be all of the other associated species with it at the same time. I try to be somewhat efficient in my work. As if I'm going to grab a chainsaw, 1 tank of gas, I go out and I work in this area, and I do all of the work in that area that I expect to have to do for the next 10 years. And so it's a little bit more severe, but it's smaller. So if we look on the aerial photo again, right in here, couple weeks ago when I was showing the spot where the black locust, this is the black locust clump as it started to move in, and before I started going at it with the chainsaw, I'd covered this whole area here. So it was a pretty severe cut of removal of black locust, easily 60 to 75% of the material I took away, and then it'll all get chipped up. So when I go into an area, whether it's chestnut or hazelnut or apple or whatever, I'll cut everything that I think needs to be cut for the next 10 years because I may not get around to it for the next 10 years. And the first thing, if you want to get scheduled to be cut, you just poke me in the eye, and we're going to have a conversation with a chainsaw at the appropriate time.
That's funny. Dimitri's got a great one. Have you ever heard about plants, or do plants release hormones when pruned, stimulating the growth of plants around them?
I've heard that as well, and then some of the things I've actually participated in some of the research on. What I thought was really fascinating is hazelnuts, when pruned, the plant that's left behind suddenly has a increase in the levels of manganese in the leaves. It's like, WTF, I mean, what on earth is that all about? But then you think manganese is a metal, so maybe if you trim the hazelnuts, it's been browsed by an elephant, for example, it starts to accumulate more metal, aluminum foil in its leaves, and anytime you chew on aluminum foil, it hurts your teeth. Maybe that's what it's doing. I don't know. So plants do remarkable things in response to pruning. And so who knows what we got to get research done and all that kind of stuff. The timing of pruning, that's one of the things right now I've really been promoting here because there's so many people that are interested in this, and they're really interested in the fertility. That timing of pruning and getting that decomposition rate really amped up, specific to your needs and the needs of that crop at the time. I think an amazing amount of research could be done on that. And then, of course, are the mycorrhizae what's communicating? You know, it's chemically communicating between plants. Is one species communicating with another species? What this researcher was talking about tonight is when this one kind of mite bites the plants actually put out a chemical that attracts the predator mites. And he's proven that over and over again, and that they're actually in the southern part of Spain converting most of the greenhouse growers are now using his particular techniques of how they're doing the timed release of the predator mites in the greenhouses, and they're getting more effective control and more yield out of the system because part of what they found out with this one particular kind of caterpillar, when this caterpillar is chewing on the plant releases this particular aroma that now attracts the predator of the caterpillar. And what it also does is it accelerates the growth and production of seeds in this particular plant, and it's the seeds that they're harvesting. And so the plant actually yields more when it's being eaten by caterpillars. It yields more and it yields faster. Fascinating research. So who knows what kind of stuff is going on in these complex systems.
This one's a lot simpler. You may not know the answer, and this comes from our friend Aze in Africa. She says, I just moved my little house, little structure on my farm in the recent trip. They spotted a black mamba that lives in a nearby tree, where she put this new structure. And I'm told that it's very dangerous to try to get rid of. Any advice?
Boy, what's fascinating about Africa, this is the birthplace of humanity, and if you consider the human species, we're known to be pretty mean. And so if we actually all came from East Africa, and we've been there for 2 million years, the only plants and animals that can survive humans for 2 million years are either very, very fast, mean, or poisonous. And the whole issue with snakes in Africa is a tricky one because it is all about habitat management. The snake that I don't like, I like even less than the black mamba, It's a small green snake. It's not a mamba, but it's also venomous. And it has this habit of hanging in low branches, and it drops down on your neck and bites you that way. It's like, I just don't like that. I do know with the black mambas, they like rock piles and cavities, hollow trees, that sort of thing. So to somehow keep your woody plants more youthful with less cavities, that's one of the things I like the least about Africa are the snakes. So, are there any local local customs about snakes and removal of snakes? I do know that where one of the places I was working in Tanzania, that people didn't go near the snakes, in part because they believed that the spirits of people who committed crimes and atrocities reincarnated as snakes, and it was their punishment to be snakes, and you don't go near them because you can be influenced by how bad they were in their life. And so if we go in there and eliminate snakes in that particular situation, the locals wouldn't do it because you don't touch snakes, because you'll become an evil person and you'll reincarnate as a snake too. So there may be other people, however, that like snakes and will come and be happy to capture that snake. And in Tanzania, I know there's this one crazy guy who will go after venomous snakes, and he harvests venomous snakes as his job, and he brings them to the snake, I don't know what they call it. It's in Arusha. There's a poisonous snake center where they actually create the anti-venom for hospitals. And so maybe find the crazy guy who harvests snakes. And then in that case, they don't kill the snake. They just use the snake, and they milk it for the venom.
All right, that's great. Two more is all. I'm going to. One of them's simple. You either have it or you don't. Do you know and this is Dimitri. Do you know the name of the guy that is teaching about the mites that you just talked about? Do you have his name?
If you look on the conference that I was just at, I think it's called "It's About the Food, My Friend," or "It's All About the Food, My Friend." In Amsterdam on this date. He'll be on the docket. Also, a gentleman by the name of Louis, L-O-U-I-S, Bolk, B-O-L-K, was on that. I was on that, the panel. He's from the Wageningen, W-A-N-N-I-N-G. I think these Dutch have way too many syllables in their words. But it's the Wageningen University near the eastern, more eastern part of Holland. That's the university he's from. He wrote a couple of books. Actually, he's been one of the guys who's been promoting eating insects. Eat your insects or eat your bugs or something like that. And he's done a lot of the research on, let's take, if we're going to take corn and beans and feed it to animals to get protein for humans, the best way to take corn and beans and turn it into protein for humans is actually use mealworms and eat the mealworms. But we'll have, I'll make sure that information is available somehow, maybe tomorrow. I don't know, Wayne, how you can get that out to folks. I'll find out his name.
I can put it up. If you find it and get it to me in an email, I can get it out.
That'd be great.
I said two, but I'm going to make it three, and that's it, everybody. Sam asked earlier. I said this is a great one. Are there tools available to help know the lag time between chop and drop and nutrients availability to the plants we want to get them to?
That's more research that needs to be done, and it also is dependent on how vibrant and alive your decomposition cycle has become. And if you're just getting started on some soil that's low in organic matter, it's going to take a few years before you get the decomposer population up. And so then as your system matures and you get your decomposer populations are fully stocked, then it's quite rapid. There were people asking me today that there's literally stuff that I chop and drop in August, that all of that's gone right now. Black locust is notorious for being one of the most slow to decompose woods out there. It's virtually rot resistant. Not on my farm. Right in here, this spot was taken over by black locust. Look at the cursor on the screen again. And I went in there and I cleared that out in June and July and did the chop and drop, hauled away the bigger material for firewood. It's gone. It's totally decomposed. So how fast does that nutrient release occurs? We need researchers to do that for us to figure that out. And then one more.
All right.
I can't believe what time it is already. This is crazy.
Yeah, I know. So this is the last one from Stefan. Very different one. On my farm, I have hundreds of neem trees established for shadow, but now want to put other species in instead of the neem. Any recommendations on how to proceed with elimination, given the strong seeding activity of neem? And then any recommendations?
One is chickens. Chickens, because chickens, will eat the seeds. They don't prefer it, but they will eat the seeds. Then just begin, especially if you've got neem growing. You're obviously in an area that gets some very, very hot tropical and very extended dry season. So we don't want to remove all that shade. Shade is important to prevent evaporation of moisture down on the ground layer. So begin by strategic removal 1, 2, 3 at a time, and replant into the opening that you create by removing. And as far as use of the wood, use it for building material, use it for cooking fuel, use it for making charcoal. Of course, the foliage, you can make a tea out of the foliage, and it's a fairly decent pesticide spray. It doesn't kill the pests, I guess. It's a repellent more than anything else. It can also be used for fungal diseases. It actually, in human beings, it's a estrogen mimicking compound. And so if you have a big, mean, ugly neighbor, keep putting neem in his tea and effeminize him or something. So just begin with a strategic removal here and there. Leave a little pocket of ground underneath. Make sure you have your water managed underneath, and you know that they're going to sprout really well. So you can pull them when they're small. They're easy to pull. But definitely keep a canopy layer so you have a partial shade over the whole area all the time. Get some mangoes and avocados growing in, papayas for some quick turnaround. So I guess that would be just a little bit at a time. Yep. Especially in a place where neem grows, don't you ever remove them all at once, because you're going to cook everything. Just remove a little bit strategically so you have some shade over the whole site still.
All right. Okay, everybody, that's going to be it for tonight. That was pretty much all of them anyway. But thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark B. And you got lots of people saying thanks to you, Mark. And next week, Mark said we may do some review again with some of our videos and things if he gets too busy here. But we'll certainly be back again next week. And maybe I can even convince him. If so, we might talk about one of the projects that we've already gotten submitted to us or something.
Not quite. That's actually not a bad idea. That could be fun. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here.
All right, and one thing for everybody, it's episode 27 in which the assignment is in, and Chris had asked that, but we put it in the chat also. And then there's a bunch of really great references that various people put in. Sam put one in. I brought it up. It's actually called Agriculture in 2050, Recalibrating the Targets for Sustainable Intensification. I just was glancing at it as he put it up, but that's great. That's in there. You guys get this as soon as this replay